Computer Club reunion recorded about a month ago on the Zoom video conferencing program. In this episode, we'll continue with the discussions on what happened at the Homebrew Computer Club. So, without further ado, let's get started.
So there we are, a garage full of 30 people. Woz is in there. And I raise my hand and say, well, we should send around a clipboard with some paper on it, and everybody write down not only their contact information and name, but also what they're interested in and what they've got and what they need. Oh, Dan Sokol showing up. Good. And that was done. I mean, I did that because that's resource sharing, and that's what you do. You collect the fundamental information, the secondary information, so people can use the phone or wherever to contact them in person. So we pushed that around, and that became the first newsletter. So that's all on the public record. You can see it in the Computer History Museum page. And I'll just read Steve's contribution here in a second. I'm going to reach it. Here we go. Here's this would be, number 2. All right, maybe that's not it, but actually, no, I don't have it right here. So I won't bother with the papers. So we had the altar there. I seem to recall that Roger Mellon was also there from Krememco, though nobody knew what it was. They had published an article on they were making a TV camera kit made out of a single dynamic RAM chip that they popped the lid off of and made it into a camera by shining light on it. And they'd also done a color dazzler. They didn't display this at that point, but apparently they had done this board for the altar. How they did it that fast, I'll never know. And we all talked about this. And Marty Spergel was also there. He called himself the junk man because what he did was he had a contact, I guess, Les Solomon at Popular Electronics. And when they had a construction article coming up, he would have them send him a list of parts, and he would acquire those parts and be able to offer them, in little plastic bags, and they could print that in the article. If you want some parts here, you go to this M&R Enterprises, whoever that is. And he had an 8008 there, and he offered it to anybody who wanted, and somebody got it. It wasn't you, Woz, I guess. I don't know who did get it. But that was the beginning of the practical sharing of resources. So we'd agreed to meet, I guess every 2 weeks, but the next meeting didn't happen for a month, I think. So the first was March 5th, I think. And so we met at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, a little cafeteria outdoor area called the green room, orange room. By the third meeting, it had grown tremendously. And Gordon French was up front trying to lecture everybody on computer science, making incorrect statements like exclusive OR is an asymmetric function. You've got A XOR B, but there's something funny about B. That's not true. They're interchangeable, and I knew that. But half the people were out in the lobby. This was held at I think, Menlo School, which is attached to Menlo College. And everybody was out in the lobby meeting each other. So I said to myself, we've got to move this process inside the meeting. Well, actually, the fourth meeting, which was held at SAIL, Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab, which at that time had a building out behind campus. It's been torn down now. And Gordon announced that he had to leave. He had to leave town for 6 months. He had a contract with Social Security Administration in Baltimore. So somebody else had to take over running the meetings. Marty said, Lee, why don't you do it? And I was ready for it because I knew what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was have several cycles of an iterative process, in which first people would introduce themselves, give their secondary information. I am, this is my name. Here I am. You can see me, and here's what I want to talk about. And then go through that, and then we break up into what I called a random access session. Everybody would just go to the people they now had identified and talk with them, and then we do it all over again, and then do another cycle, maybe 3 cycles overall. Never got past the first cycle, and that proved to be the meeting structure. And so there were maybe 40 people in the room at that point, fewer than had been at the Menlo School. But soon enough, we moved to the Slack Auditorium, and was staked out the only seat in the whole auditorium with a power outlet. Because in those days, all you used that for was the vacuum cleaner. So he was always there with Chris and Randy as his high school age spear carriers or something.
I remember him typing in the assembly code in hex during one of the random access periods, and he actually got integer basic running until somebody unplugged the computer. But he got enough of it running to really give a killer demonstration. Remember that, Steve?
That's correct, but let me add something else. Less than the technology that came out of the club and which processing computers and where it was going, I don't even have those memories real strong. It was really the people like Lee that had done good things. I believe I wanted computers for the normal people. I'd wanted it for years and years before that, almost a decade. And here he had a center where people could go in and actually get on a computer and run some programs on their own. You didn't have to be in a corporation, a company. You didn't have to be rich. And I just believed in all the people in the club that were so good in their hearts towards the purpose of, what technology could do for us was much more important than, how to do it and which parts are better and which parts, accomplish the job. So that really was more of my inspiration, the things that Lee is talking about here.
Well, and like I say, Fred constantly tried to he wanted us to get together and do something. Now, Fred was a radical pacifist. He would engage in, nonviolent, civil disobedient demonstrations. I'm sure he imagined we would all go with him on one of those. And we weren't going to do that. Everybody said, yeah, we are doing things, let's just keep doing it. Somebody was about to say something there? No. I guess I've shut you all up. There was Jim Warren was a very important person because he was the rumor monger of the place. Not every rumor he mentioned was true, he admitted, but most of them were. And so he would do his core dump, as he later called it, sitting from the back of the auditorium. I have a picture of him. I took pictures of the audience, and he is just delighted to be able to do this. You can tell. And everybody's sort of turning around and looking at him in the ranks of seats below. So he would have the rumors of the day. That, of course, became a little newsletter after he started the computer fair with Bob Riley, who was our nominal president and the guy who opened the meeting. Bob was a bit the opposite of me, you might say. He always wore a jacket and tie to the meetings. Not everybody did, I'll tell you. And he would give some opening remarks and so forth. I have one of my pictures in 1978 when I did pictures of the audience, had him at the podium. And as I recall, somebody later told me that somebody described me to them, and they were really describing Bob Riley because I wasn't there at that meeting. And it's a bit of an honor. So the computer fair was spun off from the Homebrew Club, as was Apple. And then there's all these other little businesses. And then there was InfoWorld, which is what Jim Warren's little newsletter became. At one point, it was the Journal of Intelligent Machines. Hey, that spells out Jim.
And Alan can talk a little bit about InfoWorld. Didn't you used to work for InfoWorld, Alan?
Alan?
Yes, I did. I was one of the first journalists at InfoWorld back in the day. And that's how I first connected with a lot of you guys, actually. Lee and hanging out with, at Comdex and Woz. I was in the trenches at with Unison at the US Festival in '82. That was amazing. Jim Warren was a good friend. He had a great hot tub up in the mountains here. I think it was Silicon Gulch Gazette.
Yes.
Was his newsletter. And then it became InfoWorld after that. And it was definitely a major experience for me to hang out with Jim and Wayne Green and all these characters that helped form this world.
Who did Dr. Dobbs' journal? Who did that?
Well, that was
So,
Dennis Allison and Bob Albrecht. That's the D-Ob, just spelling the name. But I think someone else was kind of pushing it, like Jim Warren. I think Jim Warren started it. He got them to be the front guys. And it was originally the Dr. Dobbs' Journal of Tiny Basic. Because at that point, Tiny Basic was the big thing, since it was tiny.
Yeah.
And several people had versions of
it. Fit into 4K.
Yeah, right.
Did you guys know Bill Godbout?
Yes.
Godbout Computers, yeah.
He ran a surplus store, Godbout, I think that it was Mike Quinn's in a Quonset hut at the Oakland airport. That was the surplus operation. Godbout was, I think, part owner of that.
Yes,
And
yes.
he
He had
got
an
in
old B-17, I believe.
What?
He had an old B-17.
Maybe he did. I never got to see it.
Yeah.
Wayne Green had Byte magazine. Somebody split off. I think he got upset about some sale and he started Kilobyte, meaning kill byte.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
He had a divorce with his wife. He
that's it.
Virginia. It was
He
really
put it in her name for
Yeah.
tax purposes, and she walked.
Yeah.
With the mag, and so Wayne was going to kill him with Kilobyte, but he never trademarked it. And Byte then started a really stupid Star Trek themed 3-panel comic strip that never said anything or went anywhere, but it had a title, Kilobyte TM. Trademarked that. And then when they told Wayne Green about that, he had to change the name of his Kilobyte to Kiloboard.
Oh, yeah. I remember those days. The Byte had hired me away from InfoWorld, so I got to plug into the Byte universe in New Hampshire for a while. It's quite interesting. Wayne Green had a license plate. He was very bitter about his divorce, and his license plate read FUVA.
Yeah, his wife's name was Virginia.
Virginia, right, yeah.
So, Dan, tell us a little bit about the Penny Whistle 103.
Dan doesn't know anything about that.
Sure, it works from Felton.
Oh, that end of it, yeah, he did know.
Yeah. Felton was like going back to the 1930s. You couldn't make a phone call out of the Felton area without going through the operator. So using, it was the 1970s. It was a long time ago. But they were so backwater. It was a great place to live. You got to get away from the central part of the Bay Area. It only lasted like that for maybe 10 years before it became overcrowded, and they put the barrier up on Highway 17, which allowed cowards to drive Highway 17. What can I say?
Oh,
but it's just how you look at it.
So I was,
And
I
it's
had
almost-
anyway, so, and was, I was announcing, am I on? I don't think I am.
I can hear you.
All right. I was announcing it in the homebrew meetings. He's coming, and Dan would always raise his hand and say, "Does it work in Felton, or will it work in Felton?" And believe me, I didn't know. Dan, you can continue the story from there, Mike.
And it worked.
Touching
It worked. We
back a
the
little bit
real
on blue box backgrounds that some of us had.
Yeah.
I remember going to Dan's place in Felton once with John Draper. I think it was to help Dan get a blue box working.
Yeah, I couldn't get my blue box working. I had brought I had built it up, and I had brought a frequency meter to check the frequencies out, and they were fine, and it didn't work.
Plus, it's so
And
much
so
noise.
Waz showed up. Waz showed up with John. John picked up the box and pushed each of the buttons and said, "Oh, your frequencies are off," and then tuned it by ear, and it worked after that.
Yeah, I can remember at the Felton, the blue boxing there was just, it was really crazy because it was really noisy and staticky lines. And
Yeah.
the fact your modem worked was really amazing.
John, what year was that? Or about how far back?
Let me think.
Might be
I would
75.
say it would be
Homebrew
Yeah.
Computer Club. We went from the
74.
Homebrew Computer Club to Dan's house, and
Okay. I'll go back even further than that. Bell Systems, Bell Labs had a journal out, Blue. If you ever seen it, lots of interesting stuff in their research people. And they had an article in the mid, I think it was 66, about a really good idea of putting control signaling in band. Really bad idea. But they
That's
explained
what
it all.
happens when you don't have any competition.
Right.
Really checking you. So they had well, let me see. So we started making the first blue boxes that came out of my university where I was. It had a good technical library, and of course I went through Bell Labs journals, and that was would be 67. We were making blue boxes. They weren't very good. It was a very simple square wave implementation with a little bit of filtering. But we did it right, solid, and those worked very well. The police eventually found out about that, started backwards, but they didn't get back up to me. That's all I can say. But at that point in time, there was musicians had learned about 2600. And they used to blow off and try to use this because they couldn't afford. Yep, they couldn't afford long distance phone calls. So that was in the blind musician sphere of influence. And John, you remember when you came out to work with me once that we were looking for a place out in the country to set up, and there was this one woman who had a place, and her other half was in New York City, and she immediately knew all about the blue box.
Uh-oh.
And talking about that, and said, "Yeah, I forget the name of him, but this would be great." So when you came out east, that was a hook in there.
Well, that was
So
an amazing bust that happened. Andy, we were in the Poconos at the time, and I had
had a very
phone
big party.
and I invited a whole bunch of phone freaks in the East Coast to attend the party. And the house was a two-story house. The party was in one floor, and the other stuff was on the opposite floor. And I had my Apple II computer hooked up to the Charlie board, and I had instructions for using it. and somebody reprogrammed the Charlie board instead of doing touch tones, was doing multi-frequency tones. It was using it the blue box on my phone line, which was heavily monitored, by the way. And shortly after
Can't
that,
imagine
about like
why.
2 hours later, the Pennsylvania State Troopers came with 2 helicopters and 17 state troopers, and it was crazy. It was like, and then Andy got pulled. Andy got arrested.
hook, a lot of redneck policemen who were running around in the second floor.
Remember during jury
where
selection?
everybody was, and they had sawed-off shotguns.
Remember during jury selection, they had some people, they were selecting jury. These people working were like John Deere. Remember that? Back when they were like selecting the jury for the trial. Man, that was
But
crazy.
Leading up to
the,
this, related to the Homebrew Computer Club,
Mhm.
we've started Apple, and okay, our computers could type into attach to a power line and send signals throughout your house. Dan Sokol was involved with a company that did that, and they could attach to televisions and they could attach to, modems, but they don't attach directly to the phone line. And Ma Bell had lost the lawsuit, and it was now legal to make devices that would attach to the phone line. I figured John Draper is a telephone signal expert, the voltages and all that. And so I hired him directly at Apple. And we sat off in a little room away from all the business types, the Steve Jobs types. And he developed his Charlie board that could not only, he was making calls with touch tones using a phase lock loop. I said, you can't use the phase lock loop to detect tones. And so we actually wound up with this. He wound up with this board. You could type a number in BASIC into a certain place, and the board would actually listen for a certain tone based on that. It was going to be 12 more years before modems detected that a line didn't answer or was busy. But John's Charlie board could do that. And so proud of him for that. And
Too bad Woz didn't accept it as a product for Apple. I think there was a whole lot of pressure from AT&T on that.
No. The other people in Apple didn't like John. I wanted it to be a product. It should have gone on to be a product. I developed prototypes, and John developed this prototype, and the others just wouldn't turn it into a product. But it should have been, absolutely should have been. It was so programmable for dialing, for answering, for turning on and off. It had all sorts of inputs and outputs that would turn on and off like tape recorders to make your own answering machine long before answering machines existed. But then John went out, like you were talking to Pennsylvania, and I told him, don't use a blue box. That's so stupid. He had already been in court twice. And this time he got the same judge that told him, if I ever see you again, you're going to prison. They put him in prison on some work furlough program, and he called me up once, and I swear he was just about crying. His printer had gone bad or gotten lost or stolen, and the letter quality printers had just come out, and I had bought a couple. So I said, I'll give you a letter quality printer. And he wanted to finish a word processor, and that's when he worked on a professional quality word processor, Easy Writer. It was like professional, kind of in the sense that it could justify the text. It could put the text into a lot of formats. And I even helped do some of the Forth programming on that. I don't think Forth was the right language, but
Yeah.
all of a sudden, the world got crazy when they discovered VisiCalc, the spreadsheet, and small businessmen. My gosh, they had a tool they could afford to do so much more than their company computer could do, but they needed a letter quality printer for business work.
The only one,
and there it was, Easy Writer. John probably made $1 million on it. I was so proud of that.
Yeah, it was the only one that did proportional spacing, letter proportional spacing. Between the letters.
I got in and modified the code. You were going to put extra spaces between words, and I said, no. These letter quality printers do seven cycles per word, and you can actually program move over very gradually and slowly. So I got to do that part of the Forth programming.
Yeah, I remember that.
Good. Yep. And it's still here. It's still here in PDF.
You hit on.
Oh, by the way,
the number one
Easy Writer, when I get this video edited, I will be demonstrating the Easy Writer 1, which is running on an emulator. It does all of the functionality of Easy Writer, and I want to do a demonstration of Easy Writer 1. You'll see it somewhere in this video that I'm going to come out with, so look forward to that.
Yeah. When I came out to People's Computer Company, which was teaching kids, really fifth graders, to sit at a DEC terminal and write basic games. And I thought that was amazing, because everybody else, the people that I bumped into, and in terms of education and bring the computer to the people, had no concept that a fifth grader could actually do something with a computer, a real computer. And it was they could not understand that. But at the
Well, that
same
was the
time,
People's Computer Company, right?
What?
That was the People's Computer Company at Menlo
Yeah,
Park.
yeah. A
And that
little
was
bit
where the
later,
Homebrew Computer Club started, to a potluck dinner, remember?
that's
Yeah, they
where
had the
I met.
potluck dinners.
I think the People's Computer Company per se was a newsletter, and that turned into a little underground paper. And then there was a
Right.
community computer center elsewhere, which was the walk-in place with the terminals and so forth. You
Yeah.
had to
Right,
understand-
right.
Yeah, but that's where I met Woz with his case and I don't know, Apple One, or maybe Apple 1/2 or something or other like that,
And Bob Allman.
demonstrating it. Yeah.
What do
So,
he wrote this
but I
book called
did
What Do You
go
Do
over
After
from
You
there.
Return?
There, I went over to Xerox, and Xerox blew my mind at that point in time. This was before, I guess, anybody in Apple got the tour of Xerox. It was years later than that. But I walked in there, I saw the first Xerox printer, which was a slab of 1/2 inch aluminum, which is, any optical bench would be, and a CRT with optical fiber, no lens or anything like that. And they moved it up against the main drum, and that was the very first Xerox. And I got that because I was offered a manual for what is it, BCL? What were they working on in language they were working on in that? It was BCPL.
Oh,
I think that was it.
That was the 940s language.
Yeah. And so he said, "Oh, I'll print you a manual on this language." And God knows that was not. We didn't see a completely justified, beautiful document, which you were talking about, and John was talking about doing something on that order. They had that, and he says, "Oh, come downstairs. We can pull it out of the Xerox machine," which was a small desktop Xerox copier with everything else torn out. And in between that, at that time it was a six-day week, and so this was a Saturday. And he said, "Oh, you should meet the guy who's doing the BCPL design," but he couldn't get through to him. Well, so he said, "Wait a minute here, I can just go over our network." At that point in time, who has a network? And go to his terminal in his lab, and that's where he got the latest version of the operating system. But wait a minute, this is a total mind blower here. How does it get from here to anybody's lab, to all the various different labs? He says, "Oh, there's this Ethernet thing we're inventing." Worked all on 75 ohm cable from the cable TV industry. But that was another mind blower. The Xerox Park at that point was, and of course that was probably the first time that I had my fingers on a terminal which went into ARPANET, and it was mostly major universities with, you know, a few out east like Harvard and MIT, etc.
I might
And
add that Xerox PARC was the precursor to the Apple, the Macintosh with the mouse and the cursor and icons and stuff like that. The Xerox PARC computer was, and its screen was like, like vertical instead of like horizontal.
Like the Alto.
And it had one page.
it was a machine on casters, approximately square, and then they had one of those drop-in mag discs back in the time when they were probably 20 or 20 something or other inches in diameter. And then on top of that was a upholstered seat you could sit on and work at your desk as proper altitude, and had the first portrait mode display sitting there, and a mouse. So, I don't know what there is to discover, but it was all there. I mean, not that they discovered a mouse, but they certainly made a version that's very similar to what we now use.
Yeah, I think it ran
that was
small
the
talk.
Alto.
And the other thing was that when you came in, they looked very cross-eyed at you on the lab where they were working on these computers, and it was not particularly good static electricity. Back in those days, the chips did not have protective inputs, put lines. So you had to ground yourself. you had to go through this procedure because somebody had a deep pile carpet in a laboratory. Leave it to management or something, because this is really high end.
I'd
Okay.
like to go back a little to like the Homebrew Computer Club, which is what we're meeting for. And our purpose, not every person attending had the same purpose necessarily, but it was kind of computers are coming to the masses. We wanted to be a stepping stone in there, helping computers reach the masses. And we're talking about the Altair and switches and lights. And actually 5 years before that, in 1970, 71, when I met Steve Jobs, I had built a processor, my own design, my own instruction set, everything, switches and lights. Memory was way too expensive to afford, so I only had 256 bytes. But I was 5 years past that stage. And what was going to bring a computer in the home? Were people going to do inventory, taxes? Were they going to do sales figures, hiring, all the things computers were used for? No, games was going to be the key attraction. And I'd had some experience in the early arcade industry with Atari. And so that's a lot of what the drive was for me to have the best gaming machine. It was the Apple II. The Apple I was showing off at the club before Steve Jobs even knew it existed. That was a very temporary step just to get something showing that you could type letters in, run a program. No, the Apple II computer was the first time that arcade games were color. And more importantly, the first time that arcade games were software. A 9-year-old kid in the language BASIC could type in little commands to make dots on the screen and lines on the screen move around very simply in BASIC, colored things on a screen, and make a game in one day that was good for the game standards of those days. I mean, it took me 30 minutes to program my breakout on the Apple II. And Steve and I were both shaking when we realized that the whole world of gaming was changing so greatly with that product. Being software, you didn't have to have an engineer looking at 1,000 wires and getting all the signals right into a TV set, back in the analog TV days. No, that was really an impetus that these machines could eventually be color game machines, be it Apple, Atari, Commodore, all this, follow on. But that's what really helped it move in the early days until we got some useful programs for business too.
So that concludes part 2 of the Homebrew Reunion Zoom meeting. In the next episode, we'll have the final copy or the final version of the Homebrew Computer Club. So stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe. And many thanks to my fine list of Patreons who have been making this video possible. Again, you should try to subscribe to be a Patreon by patreon.com/JD Crunch Time. And here is a list of our fine Patreons.